to YouTube. Okay, good morning, everyone. Happy Passover to our Jewish friends. Happy Ramadan Mubarak to our Muslim friends, and happy Easter to our Christian friends. He is risen. And to our Tibetan Buddhist friends, you might get another level of enlightenment today. I hope so. Who knows?
And to a friend of mine in Britain who just said she was going to find a cave and play dead all weekend and just spontaneously show back up tomorrow.
I'm sorry, say that once more.
To a British friend of mine who said she's going to find a cave this weekend and play dead and spontaneously return tomorrow.
Okay. Rise from it.
Right.
Let me write good morning in our YouTube chat. And let's see. Okay. So we are ready. And now we know. So this is the rise of the feminine today. And it seems appropriate that we make this move psychologically. And the move was made religiously millennia ago, but nobody noticed. And so we're going to learn all about it today from Dr. Jung. So this is part 3 of Answer to Job, paragraph 609. Before turning to the question of how the germ of unrest developed further, we must turn back to the time when the book of Job was written. Unfortunately, the dating is uncertain. It is generally assumed that it was written between 600 and 300 BC, not too far away, therefore, from the time of the book of Proverbs, which was the 4th to the 3rd century BC. Now, in Proverbs, we encounter a symptom of Greek influence, which, if an earlier date is assigned to it, reached the Jewish sphere of culture through Asia Minor, and if a later date, through Alexandria. This is the idea of Sophia, or Sapientia Dei, who is a co-eternal, more or less hypostasized pneuma of feminine nature that existed before the creation. Quote, "The Lord possessed me in the beginning of his way, before his works of old. He was set up from everlasting, from the beginning, or ever the earth was. When there were no depths, I was brought forth. When there was no fountains abounding with water, when he established the heavens, I was there. When he marked out the foundation of the earth, then I was by him as a master workman. And I was daily his delight, rejoicing always before him, rejoicing in his habitable earth, and my delights were with the sons of men." And this is the direct note here is from Proverbs 8, 22 to 24, also 27, and Proverbs 8, 29 to 31. But this segment of Proverbs 8 really begins at Proverbs 1 through 31 also. So if you read those passages, you will find that the feminine existed even before the earth. And so do you want to comment on that, Jordan? Oh, cannot hear you, sir. muted.
Push the wrong button a second ago. Let me get this in here so we don't get background. Yeah, the present prior reminds me two things. One, the sapientia or sapient is wisdom, pretty much, which is the same as the Sophia piece. And we've talked about this a little bit in the creative unconscious, art and the creative unconscious, where Lilith's first husband was the moon then being that male that did not have its own light, saw the reflected light of the sun, which at that point in ancient times was seen as feminine. And it's interesting to me, the feminine first, and it makes the potentiality of the universe as yet unformed into an unfertilized womb. And I think that's important here when it says the Lord possessed me in the beginning of his way, before his works of old. 2 points of distinction. The capital L Lord then is not Jesus. That was a way to refer to God. And as that has been pulled through the New Testament, a lot of people attribute it to Jesus as the prophet. And so it's not incorrect all the time, but there's sometimes when it's one, the other, or both and. And I think that's important to, when we're reading this, when at the end, when he established the heavens, I was there. And I believe traditionally this would be Shekinah, Shekhina, which was the female portion of the Godhead, which existed prior to the creation. Thoughts from you on this passage?
Well, I think that it's important to understand that we're talking about the psychological development of the human being here.
Mm-hmm.
And early Iron Age men, which is what everybody in the Bible from the beginning is, they didn't have a very clear conception about how their psyche worked. And so they had to come up with explanations for it, and explanations for what's going on. And those various explanations resonated with the people that were living at that time, because they didn't have what we would today call science. And so they had to explain things another way, and it sort of got pushed out of the psyche. I think perhaps at the time of Abraham and Moses, the Jews pretty well understood these things at a visceral level. I thought it was very interesting. Last week I saw Charlton Heston in the Ten Commandments, and I had never seen it, and I really wanted to see the scene where they spread the Red Sea, and that's quite dramatic, quite good, it's for special effects, it still works today, even though the movie is 65 years old, or at least 65 years old. But what I found really, really fascinating was Charlton Heston is spouting all this Jungian psychology, literally. And, he's talking about these things happening in the psyche. And I was really amazed by that. I said, wow, so the movie makers have been sticking Jungian psychology into our movies for years. I really rue the day that we got away from reality in movies. And I think particularly of the James Bond series, which my favorite James Bond movie was From Russia with Love, because to me, it seemed the most realistic. Before it with Dr. No, and after it, it just went to, a big chase scene, basically. and
more, whether it was criminals or women, one of the, it's
more and more, more and more special effects and less reality. But I thought that From Russia with Love seemed realistic to me in some ways. I mean, there were some fantastic things, like the Turkish man who had gotten an old periscope from an American submarine and had put it up into the he had it so it could raise in the conference room of the Russian embassy. That was a little bit far-fetched, but at least it seemed somewhat plausible. It
was hilarious at the same time, brilliant. I'm glad you brought up the alchemy of psychology there. I didn't touch that at all. And there's the idea of the unsquared circle of the alchemists, and the circle that has no line drawn across it is the potentiality of the psyche before it's experienced anything. And so the squared circle is literally first drawing one line, which gives it direction, top and bottom, right, and logistics. And then the second line makes the four psychological functions. But you brought up that, and honestly, that periscope coming into the conference room totally changed that scene. And and so they talk about an evolution. I mean, a little kitschy at first, but then afterwards, it's like, wow, that's not just superficial. That's pretty fun and brilliant.
Right. And then last night was my answer to From Russia with Love, which is this new movie called All the Old Knives. And
I keep seeing the preview for that,
and it is wickedly interesting, because it is very realistic, and you say, oh my God, this is the way these people have to live. And there's some aspects of it that are not realistic. For example, they set up the CIA in the embassy in Vienna, and it's like they have this big modern office with cubies and all that sort of stuff, and I can assure you, and they had Chris Pine coming in and out of the embassy into this office place where they were secure theoretically, and of course somebody that's undercover isn't going to be coming in and out of an embassy
from the front door, right?
It's not never, but I mean, that's the only real anomaly that I could see in there. And the movie is very slowly paced, I think intentionally, so it makes you think about what the heck is going on all the time. And it's just remarkable what the ending is.
Every time I turn something on to watch, that's the first one that keeps popping up. Like,
right,
this is your recommendation. This is your recommendation.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was a good movie, and I thought that I could see it a couple more times to fully grok everything that's in it. But my point is that psychology works slowly, and the point that Dr. Jung has made is that everything about us that will ever happen is already in the first living cell. and that includes the feminine. And that first living cell came 3.5 billion years ago, on this planet at least. And
yeah, I always say that, all of our wisdom lives within, somewhere even beyond our emotions and feeling.
oh, way
And
beyond. Yeah.
way beyond. And I think that that's the influx of the intuition from the creative wellspring, and then the unconscious beyond that. And it's
Right.
Look within. I mean, look at the Stoics. I mean, look within.
Yeah. And so human beings have been trying to figure this stuff out for thousands of years, obviously. And there's a couple of things I want to bring into this that I don't have at the desk right now, so I'll go get them. But
Okay.
But the point is that in this part of Proverbs, we have the Old Testament Jews, fleshing out exactly what the feminine is, figuring out what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, it's wisdom, but at first I railed against this. I said, holy cow, they're saying that only women have wisdom. And that's not it at all, of course. But
well,
anyway.
I think that's interesting and also good that you railed against it at first, because I railed against the a priori knowledge in philosophy when I first experienced it, because it's like, well, how can something come before nothing? I mean, kind of thing. But then there's the genius loci of the spirit, of the identity, of the energy. There's a certain orbital pattern, personality, if it were, of something before it even comes into being. So, I mean, I think, I don't really go so much in that we, spiritually decide to incarnate kind of thing, but the Sophia being that time before, the place of all knowledge rather than the differentiated knowledge of wisdom. So I think there's that two-tiered voice of Sophia that, it's not that only women know, or only women are wise. It's that the ovum, actually the sperm too, but independently. And until they come together, they don't activate. So there's that insulated quality to both of them until boom, you get the fertilization.
And you get everything.
Yeah.
Well, and so one of the things that Jung talks about is the fact that some things may be a little simple for us today. Now that we have science and we've worked through a lot of things that we see in our universe, we have to come up with other ways of understanding what God is. And so I have this quote I've been working on. I'm going to leave this for you to comment on, but I'm going to share it here. This is a quote from Dr. Jung from a letter that he wrote to a colleague of some 30 years standing in 1956. There are earlier letters that Jung wrote to this same person in 1930. So he knew him quite well, or her. I'm not sure it's a man or a woman. The name is Elenid. It might be male. It's a person. It's a person who lived in Los Angeles. It turned out I did find that out. But this one quote, it's within a paragraph that's like a page and a half long, and it's like the last 1/4 of the paragraph. And so what I have started to do with my calligraphy, because it illuminates for me is, remember the old saw that if you're going to write a novel, you should put all five senses on every page. So there's some smell, there's some, a reference to a smell, a sound, a feeling, a touch, a taste, whatever on the novel. But in psychological functions, you're only covering 1/4 of the psychological functions, which is the sensing function. And you haven't covered the other four: intuition, thinking, and feeling. And so what I started to do was to, in my calligraphy, put phrases of Jung and even single words into 4 different colors that tell you which of the functions it is. And when you do that, oh my God, it really opens up, because then you can argue with me about whether I've gotten the right function. That's fair enough. Yeah. But the point is that even that argument makes it alive. It really makes it alive.
It does. And in fact, actually, what I've been really digging about you doing that is that, the pre-Gutenberg Bible murder of calligraphy and illustrated manuals,
right?
Regardless, it's not a matter of you're correct or not. I think we can leave that to your perspective. Right. And that's where, in a sense, that's your position. And it's not arguable in the court of law. It's okay, if you disagree, please come up with your position, and let's then have a discussion between the two. And then that way, neither are wrong. They're both based on perspective of how your psyche operates.
Right. And you want something moving around. And, even my logos, which is rationality, among other things, but even my logos always resisted the idea that God was a word. In the beginning was the word was with God, and the word was God. And I said, what? A word. And of course, always I was looking at a black and white Bible. And so what I have realized in the last month is that when Gutenberg came along and started printing Bibles, we went entirely to the logos, and we took the life out of the Bible. But if we went back and we did a comparison, if we published a new Bible that had the illuminated manuscript on one side, probably in Latin, and then whatever language you choose on the right side in your whole book, right? And this would be hard to do. You might have to do this in multiple volumes. But if you created a Bible that looked like that, all of a sudden it would open up and really make the living word. And so I'm going to give you a demonstration of that and talk about what God means in terms of what Dr. Jung was striving at. And
that's an important sketch for a new kind of volume too, because like as Dr. John Jackson has so aptly said and expressed, the Hebrew it's very repetitive. In a sense, the Hebrew language is a musical incantation in itself. I don't think he said that, but the repetition piece is that so many Hebrew words will have 16 or so meanings. And so the way they're pronounced, at least the way they're pronounced or the syntax in which they're presented will change the meaning. And so often the biblical English translations are actually not translations, they're paraphrased translations, because they take all that important repetition, which makes the song. So you start to see that in the Psalms simply because they're songs, but you're expecting the song. There's supposed to be the versing of the song throughout the whole of the book, from that storytelling and voice perspective of, how an elder speaking a story would would spin the yarn, so to speak. And
yeah,
you know,
absolutely. Yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share this 1/4 of one paragraph of Dr. Jung's letter to Ellen Kochnig from 1956. And I'm going to read it, and then I'll leave it to you to comment on it while I go grab these other 2 books. So here we go. All right, so here is my sharing of the calligraphy that I've been working on. This was an earlier version, so it has some errors in it, but it does have the entire quote, so that's what I wanted to show you. So man's relation to God probably has to undergo a certain important change. Instead of the propitiating praise to an unpredictable king, or the child's prayer to a loving father, the responsible living and fulfilling of the divine will in us will be our form of worship of and commerce with God. His goodness means grace and light, and his dark side, the terrible temptation to power. Man has already received so much knowledge that he can destroy his own planet. Let us hope that God's good spirit will guide him in his decisions, because it will depend upon man's decision whether God's creation will continue. Okay, so you can start unpacking that, Jordan, and I'll be right back.
cool. Well, I'll start with, the grace and light piece, because often, these days, if you hear light workers, light has this positivity sound to it. Light, though, traditionally too, is something that can burn things, which is a purification piece. So the grace is this fluidity, and the light is the purification. Also, the terrible propitiation to power, or of power, brings up an important distinction between greed, which is the love of power, and then life, which is the power of love that ends up self-nourishing and self-saving, so to speak, in terms of the integration and the idea of that looking at our own personal relationship with this quote unquote capital G God. And when Jung said man has already received much knowledge, and he can destroy his own planet. So man, I would switch to people have already, just to make sure that it's not just assumed that means a general term for the human race. But the ability to self-destroy brings on self-destruction. And what's interesting is self-destruction is not new to the modern age, but it seems to be more prominent in that we're more primarily removed from capital N nature, where at that point, nature will kill you. Nature's the one that's going to put the influence, the dents in your armor, so to speak. Just from stickers and poison animals and just the general exertion of working in the elements, and also we have longer lifespans here now, so it's the kind of thing where we encounter more new things to learn, and I think those things we haven't really learned can sometimes provide a confusion, which can in a sense kind of muffle the process of that grace and light, especially muffling the light piece, which is the burning, the purification, shining light on so the shadows scatter, all the insects under the rock kind of thing. Except there's a piece here that I think he doesn't, bring up specifically, but it has to do with shadow work. And it's, I think, a matter of some people you need to dim down the light so the shadows can actually play in. Because the grace, the fluidity, is that kind of oceanic shadow, depth, darkness that gets purified by the light. And I'll wait till Skip gets back here to go much further. But I think that between the concept of the grace and the light, which would be the ocean and the purification, and the terrible temptation of power, whether it's pulled to the power of love or to greed and the love of power. Those are pieces that dance within us all. And I think when they dance within us all, it's, who's leading, who's following, who's acting, making action, who's informing. What's the counterpoint? What's the magnetic counterpoint, I think, is the question. Not what you don't like about yourself. What pieces are not purified or not worked with, almost like gold ore being worked to get the goodie out of it. So I think the grace and light here and the terrible temptation of power are the two things I focus on in regards to also the difference between, say, the time of Proverbs and 300 years ago, 200 years ago, 100 years ago even, and now there's a geometric increase, I think, in the amount of knowledge. But the question becomes, how far have we evolved? And this knowledge curve gives us more things to be distracted by, confused by. And then that, I think, incredible temptation to power, whether it be to the love of power over the power of love, which is, in a sense, going to the grace, the oceanic, the raw, the pure, not purified by the light. Because again, as I started, Skip, the light here is not so much positivity. It's the older version of light purification.
Well, consciousness.
Yeah, consciousness. So you turn over the rock and all the little beasties scatter,
right.
And you clean things out.
Well, I want to also emphasize here the responsible living and fulfilling of the divine will in us. Mm-hmm. Okay, so this goes back to my point that in the first living cell, there was already the divine will. Okay, and it's our job to bring that divine will into consciousness. And, we see exactly what Jung was talking about here in this sentence, where you can see it exactly as compared to the Russia-Ukraine war right now.
That's a great point about that divine will, and even in that first cell, because even, for example, Jurassic Park, Jeff Goldblum's mathematician character. Oh, nature will find a way. Nature will find a way. That's that divine will.
Right. Absolutely. Okay, so I left that there for a while so people would have time to read it if they wanted to, and to get a start on it. You can go back to it at a.
I particularly like
date.
Those that you have. I'm sure they'll be great pieces when they're finished, but I particularly like the strikeouts there because it shows what slipped out, and it shows that focus, and too much focus actually causes mistakes. But in the big picture, it shows process. Right. You're chewing on these things. It's like learning. It's like sight reading a piece of music. You may do it wonderfully, but you probably know how to fluidly cover up your mistakes too.
Right.
And
right.
When you're playing whatever instrument.
Well, there will be a final version of this before the confluence where people can have access to it if they want. And maybe they'll be for sale. I haven't decided yet because obviously, like here, I made a big flub in the middle of this temptation. And here, so he can destroy knowledge, and so much knowledge that he can destroy is the way it actually is. And what that is indicative of is the fact that when I'm in my work, doing this calligraphy work as an art form, and it's really only for me. Okay, I'm not trying to sell anybody on this at all. I'm just doing it as my own kind of meditation. And what I found is that it works tremendously as a meditation technique because it does make you think about, work through and chew on, as you say, chew on these words. And so in that sense, it's very exciting to do this. But what happens is, if you get too far into it, you hypnotize yourself. And that's what happened here, where I basically just fell asleep.
While still writing. Yeah, or while still writing, right.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because this brings up to me a concept I like to use, that instead of Freudian slips, there are Jungian slips. And that, that's what's popping right out of your psyche, that it's not something negative. It's, oh yeah, I guess I was thinking that, huh?
Right.
I mean, so
that's exactly
truisms,
right. Yep,
truisms.
That's exactly right. That's exactly
I think
right.
It's I've told you before too, when I did some calligraphy years ago, I got so hyper focused, and in that hypnotism place, I actually misspelled my own name.
I've done that.
And I just sat there staring, going, now, how did that happen? And that was the first time when I really realized, oh, it's a Jungian. I see. I'm so far somewhere else that I'm still acting, but the mind is forgotten. So the body remembers, but my body didn't know how to spell my name. So.
Right. And the significance of that idea of hypnotism comes up in my first reading of Answer to Job, which I read without commentary, but you can find on this YouTube channel if you want to. And at one point, I literally put myself to sleep. I'm reading it, and then all of a sudden my head goes down on my chin goes down on my chest, and there's actually video of this.
Oh, too funny.
And I actually don't remember now how long I was asleep, but then I woke up and said, whoa, I wonder how that happened. But I literally went out like in hypnotism. And so that's what got me thinking about hypnotism. But think about the difference, as you're correctly saying about the Jungian slip. Look at the difference in meaning here. So when I was hypnotized, I said, man has already received so much knowledge that he can destroy. Okay, so so he can destroy knowledge. Okay,
right.
What I wrote originally was, man has already received so he can destroy knowledge. And then I realized, whoa, wait a minute, that isn't what he said. He said, man has already received so much knowledge that he can destroy his own planet. And so that's different. Destroying the planet is different from destroying knowledge.
Well, yeah, the first one is you then dropping ye old logos into the crucible and taking your mortar and pestle and crunching it up so you can make something out of it. I mean, it's to destroy the knowledge is to break it up, kind of thing. So,
but literally, I was asleep when I wrote that and put that there. And so anyway, this is just a rough draft, because when I'm doing these things, I have to do it 2 or 3 times to get the spacing correct and so on my sheet.
Well, I also like, if you hold it up just one more time, I really like the way you literally land the text in the first paragraph. You're coming up high, coming down onto the tarmac. And then as you get through it, it's the bottom, you get down to these nice flat lines. You're at the terminal, you're at the airport, here's your unpackaging. And it's interesting, just even the focus of starting high and going low, I mean, from a handwriting analysis perspective, some people could say, oh, well, that's, the person is not feeling so high, so hot, they're more depressed. Here, I'm going, no, he's landing. He's bringing some highfalutin stuff down to the tarmac to unpackage for people.
Yeah, that's the general idea. And the amazing thing is that Jung could just knock this off.
He
probably dictated this and didn't remember he did it.
Well, and I remember being in Mont Saint Michel in France and being in the huge illumination rooms, and you could walk into the fireplaces. They were 6.5, 7 feet tall.
Yeah.
And I remember going, this wasn't just for warmth. This is because they didn't have an eraser. It's like, got to throw that.
Yeah, sure.
They didn't have an eraser, so their mistakes would actually warm them.
With the mistakes, let there be light, right?
Yeah, that would be light, exactly.
Okay, so I took that moment to go get my books, and I'm
going to refill my coffee real quick.
Right, and so the first book is actually, I guess I should bring it up on the screen because let's see, where is this? Okay. I'm bringing up the cover of this book because I hope I am. I guess I'm not there. Shoot. Thought I had it. Yes. Yeah, I didn't. Hold on. I'm still flailing around to find the cover of this book that I want to show. If I can.
What's interesting is while you're doing that, I lost so much in the move. So I was placing an Amazon order the other day for Tarot and the Gates of Light by Mark Horn to do the Counting the Omer, which started, last night at sundown as a discipline with a group. And it's interesting. I saw synchronicity, an acausal connecting principle. And I'm like, oh, well, pick that up. Go ahead and replace one more book. But it's interesting that acausal piece really fits within, you talking about all the knowledge being in the first cell. This acausal, meaning nothing has caused this. It does not have cause. It naturally exists. And I think that kind of unpacks that acausal piece of connection and synchronicity.
Right. Now, what I'm going to read now is from Seven Pillars of Wisdom by T.E. Lawrence. Now, if you don't know what this is, T.E. Lawrence was Lawrence of Arabia, and there was one of the best movies ever made about about a short portion of his life. It was made in 1961, but it's still very, very powerful movie. And I think it won Best Picture, certainly. And that movie is entirely based on Seven Pillars of Wisdom. And just to give you an appreciation, Seven Pillars of Wisdom has been published and republished multiple times since it first came out in 1925 or something like that. And in fact, T.E. Lawrence had written most of the manuscript at the Paris Peace Conference. Then I guess he left it on a station platform or something and it entirely lost it. So he rewrote it again. And this was at a time when there were no computers. So he had to handwrite this thing out. And typewriters, even at that time, were pretty rudimentary. So it's doubtful he was doing this by typewriter. But the reason
he got Hemingwayed. He got Hemingwayed because like Hemingway's wife accidentally left a box of his manuscripts when they moved at one point, so they were gone. But I think it's because she thought they were crap, and so when he decided to start them over, they had a whole different voice. And I probably divorced her for losing his work, but I think he should thank her. So
yeah, maybe, who knows. I know my writing changes over time, but in any case, what I want to emphasize here first is that there are multiple versions of this book, and the one that you want is the one I'm going to show you because it's an unabridged version. And the passage that I want to read you, which is only one page, is precious, but it has been edited out of many of the versions, and shamefully. And so if you want this passage, which is chapter 63 of this book, chapter 63 on page 234 of this book, so you can find it. But this is the version that you want. And on Amazon, when I bought it, and I've bought it now at least 3 times because I keep giving it to my grandsons as they reach 18 to talk to them about responsibility and what's the difference between playing lacrosse and entering the responsibility of an adult human being.
Mm-hmm.
So the point is that this passage got ripped out of it in the other versions that I've purchased, and it's hard to find. So yeah, even this passage, if you don't know where it is, it's hard to find. But it is chapter 63, and it's in chapter 63. Now, the reason I want to read this, and particularly on this day, Easter Sunday, is because it talks about the origins. In one page, he covers a delightful story that happened to him when he needed a bath, and something that happened to him when he needed a bath. And it covers the origins of all the religions. It covers why monotheism, and a bunch of other topics. I mean, this guy was so erudite. He went to Oxford, and his liberal arts education was so far above mine that I don't even know where he got most of this stuff, but he covered it in just a few paragraphs.
Well, and before you start, so it doesn't interfere with the message after, is some kind of molecule. You mentioned chapter 63, page 234. That to me brings up another wonderful reason Jung's paragraphs are numbered, because when translating, then you also immediately notice, oh, damn, I forgot that paragraph. You know, it's not going to get, so if someone omits something, there's not going to be a paragraph renumbering. You're just going to notice 620, 622. It's like, well, where's 621? Right. What happened there?
Right. So what I'm going to share first here is the cover of the version that I'm reading from, so that you can see what that looks like on Amazon when you go to buy this. So here's Lawrence, T.E. Lawrence, in full regalia. And it's a photograph on the cover of the book. Now, I'm going to read this, but I'm also going to put it on the screen so it's a little easier to follow. And I'll just start here, and I'll just start in the middle of this sentence so you sort of get the idea. About were Arab scratches, including tribe marks, some of which were witnesses of forgotten migrations. But my attention was only for the splashing of water in a crevice under the shadow of the overhanging rock. From this rock, a silver runlet issued into the sunlight. I looked in to see the spout, a little thinner than my wrist, jetting out firmly from a fissure in the roof and falling with clean sound into a shallow, frothing pool. Behind the step, which served as entrance, the walls and roof of the crevice dripped with moisture. Thick ferns and grasses of the finest green made it a paradise just 5 feet square. Upon the water cleansed and fragrant ledge, I undressed my soiled body and stepped into the little basin to taste at last a freshness of moving air and water against my tired skin. It was deliciously cool. I lay there quietly, letting the clear, dark red water run over me in a ribbly stream and rubbed the travel dirt away. While I was so happy, a gray-bearded, ragged man with a hewn face of great power and weariness came slowly along the path till opposite the spring, and there he let himself down with a sigh upon my clothes spread out over a rock beside the path. From the sun heat to spread out over a rock beside the path for the sun heat to chase out their thronging vermin. He heard me and leaned forward, peering his rheumy eyes at this white thing splashing in the hollow beyond the veil of sun mist. After a long stare, seemed content and closed his eyes, groaning, "The love is from God and of God and towards God." Okay. This up. All right, so that's the quote that he says in Arabic, obviously. All right, so hang on, because here it comes. His low-spoken words were caught by some trick distinctly in my water pool. They stopped me suddenly. I had believed Semites unable to use love as a link between themselves and God, indeed unable to conceive such a relation except in the intellectuality of Spinoza, who loved so rationally and sexlessly and transcendently that he did not seek, or rather had not permitted, a return. Christianity had seemed to me the first creed to proclaim love in this upper world, from which the desert and the Semite, from Moses to Zeno, had shut it out. And Christianity was a hybrid, except in its first root, not essentially Semite.
Semitic, right?
Or Semitic, yeah. Its birth in Galilee had saved it from being just one more of the innumerable revelations of the Semite. Galilee was Syria's non-Semitic province, contact with which was almost uncleanness for the perfect Jew. Like Whitechapel to London, it lay alien to Jerusalem. Christ, by choice, passed his ministry in its intellectual freedom, not among the mud huts of a Syrian village, but in polished streets among fora and pillared houses and rococo baths, products of an intense, if very exotic, provincial and corrupt Greek civilization. The people of this stranger colony were not Greek, at least not in the majority, but Levantines of sorts, aping a Greek culture, and in revenge producing not the correct banal Hellenism of the exhausted homeland, but a tropical rankness of idea, in which the rhythmic balance of Greek art and Greek identity or ideality blossomed into novel shapes tawdry with the larded passionate colors of the East. Let's see here. So, Cadarene poets, stuttering their verses in the prevailing excitement, held a mirror to the sensuality and disillusioned fatalism, passing into disordered lust of their age and place, from whose earthiness the ascetic Semite religiosity perhaps caught the tang of humanity and real love that made the distinction of Christ's music and fitted it to sweep across the hearts of Europe in a fashion which Judaism and Islam could not achieve. And then Christianity had had the fortune of later architects of genius, and in its passage through time and clime had suffered sea changes incomparably greater than the unchanging Jewry, from the abstraction of Alexandrian bookishness into Latin prose. For the mainland of Europe, and the last and most terrible passing of all, when it became Teuton, with a formal synthesis of suit, our chilly disputatious north, So remote was the Presbyterian creed from the Orthodox faith of its first or second embodiment that before the war, we were able to send missionaries to persuade these softer Oriental Christians to our presentation of a logical God. Islam, too, had inevitably changed from continent to continent. It had avoided metaphysics, except in the introspective mysticism of Iranian devotees, the Sufis, of course. But in Africa, it had taken on colors of fetishism to express in a loose word the varied animalities of the dark continent. And in India, it had to stoop to the legality and literalism of its converts' minds. In Arabia, however, it had kept a Semitic character. The next page is not too good, all right, but I'll read it for you anyway. So in Arabia, however, it had kept a Semitic character, or rather the Semitic character had endured through the phase of Islam, as through all the phases of the creeds with which the down-dwellers continually vested the simplicity of faith, expressing the monotheism of open spaces, the pass-through infinity of pantheism, and its everyday usefulness of all-pervading household God, of an all-pervading household God. By contrast with this fixity, or with my reading of it, the old man of Rum loomed portentous in his brief single sentence and seemed to overturn my theories of the Arab nature. In fear of revelation, I put an end to my bath and advanced to recover my clothes. He shut his eyes with his hands and groaned heavily. Tenderly, I persuaded him to rise up and let me dress, and then to come with me along the crazy path which the camels had made in their climbing to and from the other water springs. He sat down by our coffee place, where Mohammed blew up the fire while I sought to make him utter doctrine. When the evening meal was ready, we fed him, so checking for some minutes his undercurrent of groans and broken words. Late at night, he rose painfully to his feet and tottered deftly into the night, taking his beliefs, if any, with him. The Howitot told me that lifelong he had wandered among them, moaning strange things, not knowing day or night, not troubling himself for food or work or shelter. He was given bounty of them all as an afflicted man, but never replied a word or talked aloud except when abroad by himself or alone among the sheep and the goats. So,
well, that end part too, is that that's him communing with nature, in that sense.
Yeah.
But the whole passage too even goes through it's interesting. It starts to go through that etymology of, chokma, to the language change to Sophia, change to logos, et cetera, into spiritus sanctus, which has taken the female to slowly make it male, which is right. Then takes the creative drive out of it.
Right. So the point is that we human beings have been developing all this stuff for thousands of years, trying to understand it. I can say in my upbringing, we had totally lost it in the Presbyterian Church. In other words, for us, God is out there and not in us. And there was no looking into us. And that's not what it's about. Okay. And I'm not sure that Presbyterian or Reformed Church ministers even know that. But
I was going to say, I think that's a great point. Pardon to pause there, but where then even language and translation is important, because Sophia didn't originally mean wisdom. It meant cleverness and skill. And the thing is, cleverness and skill are both practiced, connected in context to nature and to effects, influence, responsibility, consequences. But when it goes to capital R Greek reason, well, the cleverness and skill are then hidden. And it's about manipulation instead of the whole total. So like you're going to, the Presbyterian even may not know about this within what they're teaching. And
may not even know that we're talking about something that's within us. It's not out there. It's not down there. It's all within us, and it's all a step toward consciousness. And one of the critical things that comes up in our play that we'll be doing in Helena, Montana in June is that Jung himself goes through a transition of his own consciousness that is quite dramatic in the play, of course. But anyway, the point being made here is that we're talking about all of these people, including Dr. Jung. We're talking about something that was going on inside us, and it's only in the last 130 or 40 years that we started to understand that it's about our psyche, okay, and started to get that. And most people who are religious have not understood this. And it isn't to say that it's wrong. I'm not saying any religion is wrong. I'm saying that all of them are correct, 100% true. I agree that the Bible is 100% true, and it's true for all of us, as are all sacred texts. But now, since we can talk with one another around the world, we can say, oh, by the way, maybe we ought to stop this terrible temptation to power, like we're seeing Mr. Putin exercise right now, and figure out ways that we can communicate better. Of course, that's what diplomacy has tried to do. And the logic of it came from von Clausewitz, whose teaching I learned in the basic school of the Marine Corps, which is war is diplomacy carried forward by a different means. But, in the end, it's necessary for our species to eschew war, to see that war doesn't get us anywhere but the edge of the abyss, which is where we are now.
Well, and that goes into the initial parts of, what does diplomacy mean? It doesn't mean peace. It means crossing the line. But crossing the line, in a sense, not with a white flag, it's with no flag. And that's the attempt in that no man's land of diplomacy. But then you get the Oxford English, you get the logic, the reason, the convincing, the who wants to get what. Then that's diplomacy, war being diplomacy carried out differently. Well, you're crossing the line, but now you don't have diplomacy, you have intent. So there's a whole piece, I think, just in the word, what is a diplomat? The diplomats of old were courageous people, because you're taking yourself into your enemy's home, as it were. And that wasn't always something very popular. We don't want to be convinced. We need to tell you, kind of thing.
Right. But now we all are citizens of the whole world.
Right.
We realize it. We realize that a war on the other side of the planet can affect our lives in the next minute. Okay.
Right.
Because if Putin gets cooking on his anger, and this is assuming other people in his chain of command would follow the command, he could launch a nuclear weapon at the United States, and then 15 minutes later it would be here, and there would be nothing that we could do to stop it, and it wouldn't be just one. So it's
Well, even with that, even if it wasn't at the United States, even if it was just to anywhere and it detonated above ground, now we have nuclear fallout in the environment, even more than we do from all the tests, 2,465, I think, tests, maybe double that amount now. But how many, nuclear weapons? And that creates, our own self-created nuclear winter.
Exactly.
Regardless of if it's at us, even if just one explodes, if I take all the malice and us versus them and et cetera out of it, just that exploding goes right back to your calligraphy paragraph. Man having the power now to destroy themselves. That takes just general self-destructive tendencies, which are curable by reflection and by discipline, etc. But it takes that, just knocks it out of the park in just the worst way.
Right. And so it should be causing us to reflect now, because we are at the abyss. I mean, me a little bit more than you, because I'm assuming a nuclear weapon is more likely to be detonated in Washington, D.C., which is only 35 miles from me, and west of me. It's more likely to land there than in Taos to begin with. But
yeah, I'm at Noah's port. When the oceans rise, he's gonna dock up here.
Right. So but you're not going to escape it easy either, because within 3 years, if there are 23 of them, between 23 and 100 nuclear weapons detonated in the atmosphere is enough to destroy all life on Earth. And regardless of who we are. Good morning, Thomas. Happy Easter.
And we have our DC connections, here in New Mexico. They're just a little more closeted.
I'm sure, yeah. Okay, so let's go back to answer to Job. I think we've covered a lot of material here, and
I think good idea. Because New Mexico is the land of Oppenheimer. It's where all that stuff started.
Oh yeah, yep. Sandia Base and all that stuff. All right, so we're on paragraph 610. We're talking about Sophia. If you want to read, go ahead and read.
Certainly. This Sophia, who already shares certain essential qualities with the Johannine Logos, is on the one hand closely associated with the Hebrew Chokmah, or Chochmah, I can't pronounce it correctly. But on the other hand, goes so far beyond it that one can hardly fail to think of the Indian Shakti. Relations with India certainly existed at that time, the time of the Ptolemies. A further source is the wisdom of Jesus, the son of Sirach, or Ecclesiasticus, written around 200 BC. Here, wisdom says of herself, I came out of the mouth of the Most High and covered the earth as a cloud. I dwelt in high places, and my throne is in a cloudy pillar. I alone encompassed the circuit of heaven and walked in the bottom of the deep. I had the power over the waves of the sea and over all the earth, and over every people and nation. He created me from the beginning before the world, and I shall never fail. In the holy tabernacle, I served before him, and so I was established in Sion. Likewise, in the beloved city, he gave me rest, and in Jerusalem was my power. I was exalted like a cedar in Libanus, and as a cypress tree upon the mountains of Hermon. I was exalted like a palm tree in En-Gadi, and as a rose plant in Jericho, as a fair olive tree in a pleasant field, and grew up as a plain tree by the water. I gave a sweet smell like cinnamon and aspalathus, As the turpentine tree, I stretched out my branches, and my branches are the branches of honor and grace. As the vine brought I forth pleasure. As the vine brought I forth pleasant savor, and my flowers are the fruit of honor and riches. I am the mother of fair love, and fear, and knowledge, and holy hope. I therefore, being eternal, am given to all my children, which are chosen of him.
Right. And so the point is that you become chosen when you can be conscious of these things, I think.
Mm-hmm. And I think the most important line was the I alone encompass the circuit of heaven. There's that feminine creative piece.
Right.
And the circuit of heaven would be that logos vessel kind of thing, but it's inert. So that when she's saying, I alone encompass the circuit of heaven and walked in the bottom of the deep, there's the as above, so below occurring just only in the feminine right there.
Right. But one of the things that I want to emphasize here is the difference between logos and eros, because I've had any number of people over the last 6 years criticize my statement that if you look around your room and look at everything that's in the room, with the exception of with the exception of living beings and potted plants, which is also a living being, everything is dead. Okay, it's not alive. And to me, a Bible is just a black doorstop unless somebody puts life into it. Okay, unless a gifted pastor puts life into it, or if I read it and it gives me life. But in the course of, but I can never accept that a word is God, because that's the logos, and the logos is rationality. We can work out of chaos what exists in our world, but none of it is alive. Only living beings are alive, and that comes from the eros, and that's also where the chaos is. So when I'm talking about the eros, I'm talking about something that is alive in your psyche that makes you reflect on things. You know, you can say, Dick and Jane ran up the hill, and probably even that can have multiple meanings, and you can reflect on it, and it can have erotic meanings, actually, but it's a very simple thing, and it's not alive. It's, you haven't thought about Dick and Jane doing anything since you were in the first grade, probably.
Well, right. And I think what's interesting in the next paragraph, even, Jung starts to describe, then here, her describing herself basically as the logos. And I think he got this paragraph all wrong, because in a sense, she's describing herself as Eros, moving through the circuit of heaven, sitting in the throne. The heaven would be the vessel. The throne would be the smaller vessel, which is logos. But he's right then when he comes back to the logos of St. John, which then, as he goes in below, is important in regards to this content. So
right. Okay.
We have
before you get ahead of us here, I want to go back to the other book that I brought, which is the red book that I went and grabbed because I wanted to read a passage here.
Nice.
And or a couple of passages. So in this, I'm on page, I'm in a section called the Anchorite. Now, Anchorites were monks who went into the desert to have revelations, which is what T.E. Lawrence was talking about. If you go into the desert, you're going to have a revelation. Well, we all have a desert within us. That's Jung's point. Go
Well, and
ahead.
those revelations too, I mean, go with hypnotism and hallucination. I mean, there's being so tired and so starved and so thirsty, your mind turns not on itself, it frees itself. And you
Mhm.
start to get awake dreams and you're incredibly lucid and aware of them. The problem is you're also physically in danger. Typically, that's why, people, die of exposure. Well, they get
Mhm.
into the point of delusion, past hallucination, and they don't save them. They don't remove themselves from the situation because
Right.
they can't. I mean, so there's a whole lot of I think going between hallucination, divination, uh, delusion, and then revelation. They're in a sense
Absolutely.
they're almost four. I couldn't attribute those to the four psychological functions, but they're those four and more,
Mhm.
ways that they present. So they're different degrees of difficulty, different degrees of intensity.
Right. Okay. So in the Red Book, keep in mind that Dr. Jung was largely having active imagination with his own psyche. He was envisioning um, parts of his psyche as personified. Okay. In his process, his method works. I've done it extensively myself. And I can tell you that um, if you're writing a novel, let's say, and you invent characters, those those characters take on a reality to you.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're a good writer as opposed to a rationality writer, a logos writer, if you're a good writer, your characters in the novel will take on a life of their own. And
Mm-hmm.
certainly characters take on a life of their own in other forms of art as well, like Tim's sculpture, where he shows the angel grabbing Jacob, for example, uh, at the
Well, it
river.
reminds me of the old quote, and I can't remember the author, but where when the artist pours his whole heart into a work, it gives the art a
Right.
soul.
Right. So
So,
you can think of this in a way, because it's active imagination. It's Dr. Jung communicating with himself. He's revealing something that's already in himself, and it's being presented here. And so in this particular passage, which is on page 244 of the reader's edition, this is the smaller version of the Red Book, 244, and it's in the section called the Anchorite. If you have the big book, you can find it. um, Dr. Jung is asking the Anchorite, which is actually a part of his psyche, he's asking the Anchorite what he means and what he thinks about the Bible. And so Jung says, or the character in his imagination that is Jung's typical side, listed here as I, he says, "Thank you for your patience, but it matters very much to me to know how you read and what you take from this book." Now he's referring to the Bible, which is the only book that the Anchorite has in the desert. And the Anchorite answers, "Your question is not easy to answer. It's easier to explain colors to a blind person. You must know one thing above all. A succession of words does not have only one meaning, but men strive to assign only a single meaning to a secret sequence of words in order to have an unambiguous language. The striving is worldly and constricted and belongs to the deepest layers of the divine creative plan. On the higher levels of insight into divine thoughts, you recognize that the sequence of words has more than one valid meaning. Only to the all-knowing is it given to know all the meanings of the sequence of words. Increasingly, we try to grasp a few more meanings. And then Jung responds, if I understand you correctly, you think that the holy writings of the New Testament also have a doubleness, an exoteric and an esoteric meaning, as a few Jewish scholars contend concerning their holy books. Okay, so that's that. Then I want to turn the page to page 246, and the Anchorite is talking about Philo the Jew and John.
And before you go to that paragraph, I think it's important to drop back to when the Anchorite says, you want an unambiguous language.
Yeah.
That's really not very closeted and a very direct reference to the basically the logos, reason, chant of Hebrew, because the language is understandable. It means things, but it's more of, I think, even more than Egyptian hieroglyphs, it becomes a musical voice. And that's why, it doesn't matter if someone's flat or sharp when they're working with their Hebrew. It's their voice, and that's the only thing that's important, because there's this repetition. So there's this cadence, which is very musical. And I think that music in the voice is, for example, the printing press, black and white, loses the chant of the color, of the experiential, and makes it all just reasonable, philosophical, in a sense, nonsense, because it's all out of context.
Right. Now, so Jung says another thing in the voice of the Anchorite. The Anchorite says, I ask you, was this logos a concept, a word? It was a light, indeed a man, and lived among men. You see, Philo only lent John the word so that John would have at his disposal the word logos alongside the word light to describe the Son of Man. John gave to living men the meaning of logos, but Philo gave logos as the dead concept that usurped life, even the divine life. Through this, the dead does not gain life, and the living is killed. And this was also my atrocious error. So this goes back to my point about the eros in early biblical illuminations before the printing press, where the early monks were putting all kinds of life into the Bible through their illuminations. But once the printing press came down and it became black and white, regardless of language, then it was all rational. Then it's all linear and rational. But in the illuminations, I'm sure you've probably seen enough pages to know that they were filled with flowers and all kinds of things. Even jokes were expressed in the sense of images. So the point is that you have to take out of the logos the rationality, the linear words, or the linear sequence of words, as the Anchorite is talking about here, and put life into them so that they have some sort of meaning. And this is because we've gotten away from putting life into these words. We have also gotten away from our religions. And so in order to get back to that, we have to understand that we need to be doing something other than what we've been doing.
Well, and that brings up to me, coming back to the religions, if religions had the heart of the matter put back into them, they could again become a psychotherapeutic event for community and culture. And it reminds me, honestly, of the death card and the tarot, because the death card is not the Grim Reaper. It's the other shadow force of this original all wisdom lives in the first cell. Well, this is the counterpoint. Death is, it's a state, it's a place, it activates, but it's not really a verb. It's more of a state of an original condition that goes with that original cellular wisdom condition. So I think it's important, even mythically, to don't think the Death Guard is the Grim Reaper, and actually don't look at the Grim Reaper as death. It may be the bringer of, but it is not that itself.
Right. And like even a mythical story, even our superhuman stories that we sometimes have on celluloid these days in movies, Superman or Spider-Man or whatever it is, as long as they're just images on a piece of celluloid or on a tape, or little colored electrons before they're projected out on the screen. Even when they're projected out on the screen, they're nothing. Okay, the screen's still there. There's different colors on different pixels of that screen, but when your psyche has to interpret that into a living form during the time that you're watching the movie, and even after you've watched it, then you have to reflect on it in order to understand what the message is of the movie. And this is what I've learned very painfully over a very long period of time, that there's always a message in a movie, and you have to find that message. And
that message, I like that you said that just that way, because I remember I used to collect fountain pens, and I was always fascinated with the celluloid fountain pens, which are recycled old film. And it has just such a mottled, wonderful, texture just to the look and the feel. But as you were saying that just now, it reminded me, oh, these messages, they've now been made into the vessel of this pen, and I shall then write stories or whatever with them. So in a sense, it's recycling that idea of the message and then putting it out in a whole nother form to put it back to the writing, so that you made a nice circle there for me from back to I really think these celluloid pens are cool. I didn't need to know why, but I didn't see that circle of going from the message of the film to the vessel of where my ink well was.
Right, which reminds me of a museum in your pocket, because I too have a pen collection. And let's see if you can see this. Okay, so here's one. This is a Mont Blanc pen in honor of F. Scott Fitzgerald. Fitzgerald, and this one is a Mont Blanc pen in honor of Charles Dickens. And the significance of it is, well, a pen is just a pen, and you can write life with a Bic. That's certainly true. I use my Bic pens quite a lot. These are my 1.6 millimeter very broad Bic pens that I use to underline my books. But the significance of these pens is that anything that can bring something to life is a part of culture, and it's also part of Eros. So I always carry, when I'm going to a business meeting, I always carry one of my pen collection, because if you have some downtime, like before a meeting, or there's a break, or as used to happen to me often in the Middle East, where people would stop for their prayer time, I could, for the other people who were not Muslim, I could pull out my pen and tell a story with that, and it becomes a museum in your pocket. And the same can be said for anything that you can put in your pocket, of course. But that's one of the reasons I collect expensive pens. And you mentioned the collection of pens, and I've been buying pens on eBay. especially the last couple of weeks, because I decided now that's what I want to start giving my grandsons for their graduation from high school.
Well, and that's honestly more than my tarot collection. My fountain pens are also in that quote unquote move.
Yeah.
I mean, my Pelican burnt orange. There's a Graf Zeppelin, sterling silver with blue, and then a Rotring 700. And the Rotring 700 is this thin, wonderful gunmetal pen that started out as black matte, but just from the quality of use, it's turned to more of a gunmetal. So that the history in the pens, it's funny you mentioned on eBay, that gives me the I wonder if I can replace my fountain pens quicker than my books.
Yeah. So Thomas Dennis is with us, and he says that he had made the comment that there's been no film made of the book of Job, and then he said, but a quick YouTube search tells me I'm mistaken. So Thomas, please tell us what the movie about the book of Job is so that we can watch it. But that's, a significant feature. I mean, what Job
I think it
is,
also, go ahead. I was going to just say, any movie that has suffering and resurrection is loosely related to the story of Job. Up your video, it seemed to have frozen.
At Job's time, which was 500 years BC, maybe, God was an unpredictable king. And then Christ came along and made God all good. But then the problem is we wrote evil out of the equation. And as we see from Vladimir Putin, who's the poster boy for evil, terrible temptation of power. What are the Russian people going to think of this man when, their sons went out on this cruiser, the Moskva, and didn't come back, and are now at the bottom of the sea.
Well, and it reminds me, taking the evil out of the equation, that's like a parent who's overly harshly scolding a child. It doesn't make the child change their behavior. It makes them hide it better. And so when we when we overly scold, don't you be a bad boy. Well, 30 years later, look what comes out, evil. I mean, and not everywhere, but the thing is owning that shadow, owning that depth, and incorporating it, and even using it as foundation, something to found the light in, so to speak. But the light being the purification, not the, all the positivity, all the goodness. It's the light, which is the life. And so you're right, when that evil is taken out, or the shadow is taken out, or basically we try to only have good sunny weather. Well, calm seas, never a good sailor made. You got to have those storms, to really, really get the life in there.
Right. So Thomas says, well, he's not going to give the name of the movie because he says some things people have to search for themselves, which is fair enough. And
fair enough.
He said that he's read that Jung creates the feminine side of God in answer to Job, which when added to the Trinity makes a nice 4, which is wholeness. Okay. And this is why I'm pulling out the psychic functions in my calligraphy, because you have to have all 4 functions. In addition to all 5 senses, you also have to have all 4 functions in order to have wholeness.
I would add that adding the feminine to the Trinity makes two males and two females, because the Holy Ghost is typically feminine, and the faceless female, the anima and the spirit. And so then if he adds the fourth, the feminine, there's two psychological functions that are male and two that are female. And except we can take the gender out and make them two dancing partners.
Yes.
And two dancing partners, because it's not that, a genitalia male or female, it's the creative drive, basically creative drive and sexual drive. And they're two different pieces that are components of the psyche.
Right. And I always have to come back to
I'll be right back.
Lauren Roche, who this is from Hinduism, but directly on what Jordan was saying. The Bharava Tantra is set as a conversation between the goddess, who is the creative power of the universe, and the god, who is the consciousness that permeates everywhere. For short, they call each other Devi and Bharava, or Shakti and Shiva. They are lovers and inseparable partners, and one of their favorite places of dwelling is in the human heart. And so you need to have both. You have to have the creative power of the universe and the consciousness that permeates everywhere. And I was just reading about Shakti and Shiva and Devi and Bharava from Hinduism, which it also addresses this. But we're approaching the end of our time. It's gone very quickly. And
I'm glad you brought that up, because even in that paragraph, the beginning of 8:10, but on the other hand, goes so far beyond, in that one can hardly fail to think of Indian Shakti, and that there's a relationship there.
Right. And what the nice thing about what Lauren Roche says, it's in the Radiant Sutras by Lauren Roche, Radiant Sutras. And it's actually in the introduction, and he's talking, I'll read it one more time so people hear it, because it's getting at the same topic that we've been covering throughout this 2-hour period. The Bharava Tantra is set as a conversation between the goddess, who is the creative power of the universe, and the god, who is the consciousness that permeates everywhere. For short, they call each other Devi and Bharava, or Shakti and Shiva. They are lovers and inseparable partners, and one of their favorite places of dwelling is in the human heart. And so all that, but let's, Jordan, I'm going to just read this one paragraph that you alluded to, and then we'll call it quits for today.
I'm glad you're ending us up here, because that connection of one half being the creative power, one half being the consciousness. The creative power is the shadow, the depth, the unconscious, and that takes that negativity, warring, evil, anger out, and puts that all the unseen wisdom in the first cell back in.
Yeah.
And then the consciousness is what brings that into light, basically into experience, not into positivity, not that kind of light, into the burning purification of what it boils down to reason. Precisely. And in that sense, reason just becomes the gold nuggets that you pull out of the alluvium of the creative power from the pan. Right.
So paragraph 611 of Answer to Job, we're going back to Answer to Job here, it is worthwhile to examine this text more closely. Wisdom describes herself in effect as the Logos, the word of God. I came out of the mouth of the Most High. As Ruach, the Spirit of God, she brooded over the waters of the beginning. Like God, she has her throne in heaven, and as the cosmogonic Pneuma, she pervades heaven and earth and all created things. She corresponds in almost every feature of the Logos of St. John. We shall see below how far this connection is also important as regards content. Okay, so, the point is the point that we've been making throughout here, which is that you need the four psychological functions. And so here he's referring to how Sophia describes herself. And actually, I like Lauren Roche's presentation much better because it doesn't gender it. Okay. And
yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. And that's been one of my resistances all along in Western thought, is we keep thinking of things as either masculine or feminine. And then if it's feminine, we tend to discount it. But that's not right at all, because the things that are the logos, that are consciousness, as Lauren Roche has it here in the Radiant Sutras, that's how we reflect on it. That's how we have consciousness about this fourth force that is running through us. Okay.
Well, it's interesting. I recently heard someone just chuckling, saying, well, maybe so many men are so greedy and trying to do so many actions because they have this displaced compensatory guilt and jealousy and shame that they can't give birth. So they're trying to go through all these actions, trying to make life out of money and other things, substances, etc., but simply because they can't give birth. They can't make the ultimate creation, which is more life. And I think that comes back to that. I think Lauren Roche is not, genderifying things. It can be about the creative drive and the sexual drive and all the four psychological functions, but not so much about male and female, and
Right.
I think then the equanimity can come into the equality, rather than, when people say, all people are born equal, I say no, but I say they're born equally valuably, because there's that potentiality on what any given person's going to do in their life. But it doesn't make any life worth or more or less than another.
Yeah. And Thomas asked the question, is the book called the Vijnana Tantra? It is the Vijnana Tantra, but it's translated into 20th and 21st century English, so that we can understand it. And that translation from the Sanskrit is by Lauren Roche. Okay. And so he has converted it. And I love one of his references to God here that's really good. And it's in the banter verses 10 through 12 of the Bodhisattva Tantra. And it just sort of sums up everything that is appropriate for Easter Sunday, Passover, and Ramadan. Elaborate rituals and garish images may be useful in meditation when your mind is whirling with thoughts of sex, money, and power, wandering like an elephant in heat. Go ahead and use these tools, yet no, beating drums and blaring trumpets cannot summon the one who is already present. I am not a collection of incantations known only to experts. I am not a ladder to be climbed, a sequence for piercing energy centers in your body. I am not to be found at the end of a long road. I am right here. Okay, and that's the point. That is the point, that if you start to understand these things, certainly if you understand them in all the religious traditions, they can help you, and they can help you psychologically, which is why they have developed and thrived throughout the world in many different religions, all of which point to the same thing. And the point is, wherever you go, God is present. That's the point. And it isn't that I have to persuade you about anybody's religion, because they all point at the same thing, and they're all true. And go ahead, George.
I was going to say, on a lighter note, as we began, I texted you an image for Easter that it's both humor and also talks about, I mean, to me, our newest mistranslator is autocorrect, you know, and I call him Otto, or her Otto, OTTO. But take a look, because it goes in, especially today, we're talking about, you know, priest, minister, and rabbis, so to speak, throughout this. But then this one little joke, and, you know, a little lighter sense of the same language piece.
Oh, you send it by text message?
Yeah, I think it.
I'm not going to be able to show it to anybody.
Let me email it, because I think it's a nice piece of levity. I'll get this right here. I'll send it to you this way.
Wait a minute. Maybe I can bring it up. Let me see if I can. Okay.
There you go.
Yeah. All right. I've got it, so I can share it.
But it's the old joke of a priest or minister and a rabbi, except.
Right. Okay. All right. Let me get it up on the screen. It's kind of funny. And so a priest, a rabbi, a rabbit, and a minister walk into a bar. The bartender asks the rabbit, what do y'all have? And the rabbit says, I don't know. I'm only here because of what occurred. Okay, that's a good one. Okay.
So I figured, going through our language evolution, there's like, well, sorry, they're just a bunch of rabbits. I don't know what's going on here. Like,
okay, but the significant point that we are trying to make here is that that there is a mystery, okay, and that mystery is within us. So whenever you hear a theologian of any kind say it's my way or the highway, that's the time that you should say to yourself, that's enough, I'm leaving. Because that is only about
of a power.
It's about their rice bowl. It's about, you got to do it our way so that I get paid, basically. But all these ways lead to the same thing. And, I wrote a book a few years ago, 15 years ago, called Tsunami of Blood. You can find it on Amazon. And it depicts a wave of blood, a tsunami of blood about to crash on a beach. And it's on the beach are written in sand, a Star of David, a moon, and a cross. And the tsunami is about to wipe all those out. And so my wife read this book, and she said to me afterward, well, I'm so surprised to hear you refer to God all the time, because in our life together, which is now something like 36 years, we really haven't gone to religious services, except to suit her mother. And so I actually have to go out into the other room and sit with her mother during the Easter service that we'll have on our television set today. But the point is that God is everywhere. And if you haven't understood that, then you haven't understood anything that we're saying. And, people kept asking Jung why he referred to God when he had all these blasphemous things to say about various religions. And he answered, why shouldn't I call it God? It's a perfectly good word, and it refers to what I'm talking about.
Right, exactly. I mean, what's the problem? That's basically Jung. Well, I don't see the problem. So your argument, could you please repeat it in an intelligible way so I can remember it?
Right. It's like, I don't know, did you see the movie Coda?
Oh yeah.
And the people that are interviewing the girl who's the lead say, well, you've only just been taking choir. What are you doing here? And she says, is there a question in that?
Is there a question in that? Yeah. Is there a question? I love that.
Yeah.
I love it when someone asks someone a question and they respond with just that scene of, I didn't hear your question in that. Like,
right. And so my message for today, and I'll let Jordan give his, but my message for today is that God exists, and you can get to God through all of the world's religions. And we have to stop killing one another over their way of getting to God. They all do the same thing. They're all a kind of psychotherapy, actually. And
well, my message, if I'll just make up one on the spot, there are no silver linings. The sun's always shining behind every dark cloud, always. Except no bad weather, just bad wardrobe. Enjoy the weather, because after the dark will come the resurrection. It's a way to learn.
Right. Okay. So there are a couple comments here made at the end from Jonah Carroll. I'll just read them on. Hi, I just joined. Well, you're 2 hours late, Jonah, so you might want to go back and listen to the recording of this session.
But welcome.
But welcome.
It's never too late to start. It's like.
And he says, I'm not too sure where the conversation is at this point. Here's a question on the answer to Job. Jung argues, in my understanding, that the book of Job is where the self realizes its own unconscious nature as a result of confrontation with the conscious ego. I think you have it backwards, Jonah. The self is not unconscious. The self is consciousness, and the unconscious nature is God. How do we reconcile the idea of the self's unconscious nature with the Genesis narrative? That's probably a long conversation. It's covered by all kinds of commentary in all the religions, so I'm going to leave that
I think in the Genesis piece, we'd have to just simply deal with the creative power and the consciousness as being still separate and not unified as one.
Right. Okay, so the Genesis narrative seems to clearly associate consciousness with God, the self. The self is unconscious. And the question is, how do we or anyone of any of the world's religions relate to that self? Adam and Eve eat the fruit and become aware of good and evil, and thus have the knowledge of God.
Well, and that's the birth of consciousness that then has the knowledge of the unconscious.
Right.
So it's the awareness of the differentiation. And I would jump up to St. Augustine there, where he used a mistranslation of pronoun, just one pronoun. And instead of in that, it was of them. And the of them directed it at people, which made for original sin. Instead of in that, points back to Eden in that point.
Okay, so Jonas says, this makes it seem like Adam and Eve achieve a level of consciousness that was previously only unto the self, as if the ego and the self are now both conscious entities. And this is not Jungian psychology, surely, because the self is unconscious. And as Jung said in his famous video, the unconscious is really unconscious. It's not.
Right. And then the consciousness is birthed out of the unconsciousness of the creative power.
Right.
So all the time before, the infinite backwards.
Right. And so this last comment, as if the ego and the self are now both conscious entities. I wouldn't say that the unconscious is a conscious entity. There's an awareness that it is there, that there is a ministry, and you have to gain consciousness to even have any hope of relating to it. But the point is still that all the world's religions do relate to it, and none of them are wrong about that.
Well, and I would take a translation bent to literally split a hair that I find is an important hair to split. We tend to personify things. Well, we often, as translators, we need to, in translating, even being creative, you translating which of those words goes to what color, that's a translation.
Right.
And to me, what's interesting is when we personify things, we tend to infer that anything active is conscious. And so I would make a distinction between consciousness as being conscious and active, but the self is not conscious. It's simply active. And we do not need to personify our living structure on the self. In a sense, that's the gas in our fuel tank,
Right. And the unconscious is the energy. That's what Shakti is about.
Right.
And it's all the different dualities that exist in our psyche, which make us go. If there weren't dualities, we wouldn't do anything. We would be stones.
Well, and then the self and the unconscious and the creative drive, they all become cornerstones in life that we brace against, except they have no form. Right. And so that's there in the paradox that actually works life into being. Right. Or part of it. I mean, it is a long discussion too. There's so many things we could touch in almost every word here. And so that's honestly a wonderful discussion. Is it Jonah? And
Zen Mode headquarters says the ego and self are both autonomous centers. And I will concur with that. And did you have any last remarks, Jordan? We'll go on with 212 tomorrow, next week.
No, I don't. Thanks for today. Happy Easter, Passover, beginning of the counting of the Omer, all different religions, whatever you're doing today.
Ramadan
or
Mubarak.
Ramadan, yes. And people who just, are in a cave who want to come out and resurrect.
Right. Okay. So peace on that note. Peace and take care. See you next week.
Sounds good.
Next week will be
220.
She is the feminine Newman of the metropolis. That sounds interesting. Okay.
Yep.